Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Wu Says. This is where we get real about the US, China, everywhere and everything in between. It is two global superpowers, but one global story. This week, we're turning our attention to the US, where it was all fireworks and fiscal policy, because over the 4th of July holiday, US President Donald Trump had signed into law what he calls the One Big Beautiful Bill, a massive tax and spending package meant to supercharge the American economy. But will it? It is definitely big, but is it beautiful? Joining us on the show to help us unpack all of this is Professor Wu Wing Thye, who will help us explore what this bill really signals about America's direction and how it might shake up the global economy. Hi, Prof. Wu. Let's start with the big picture. So we are looking at this bill, but I'm curious to know what you think about how this bill reflects Donald Trump's economic priorities in his second term. What is he trying to achieve with this One Big Beautiful Bill?
Well, the two things that are definitely at the top of his mind. One is to show that he's a friend of the common folks. And one of the common disdain in America is towards the government. The government is often portrayed as out of control, wasteful, and ineffective in its mission. So given that depiction, of course, did not originate with Donald Trump. That was Ronald Reagan's message when he successfully won the election in 1980. Ronald Reagan's campaign consists of getting the government out of your way. And getting government out of the way means that instead of the government spending your money for you, you go and invest your money and make the economy grow. So the depiction of the government that Donald Trump is exploiting is the depiction of the government as tax and spend organization, because it's the ability to tax, and so it taxes and it spends. So the way to eliminate that tendency is to do what Ronald Reagan says: starve the beast. How do you starve the beast? You don't give it food. And what is its food? Revenue. So you take away its revenue and prevent it from spending. So in this is what Ronald Reagan started, followed by George Bush Jr. when he came to power in 2000, and now by Donald Trump in his first term and second term. Let us talk about the specific package of Starve the Beast this round. The first thing is he has cut taxes, and the largest proportion of the tax cuts go to the richer segments of the population. The poor, there are tax cuts for there'll be for the lower classes, in terms of there'll be no more taxation of tips and overtime, and people who are retired, their social security payments will have bigger tax deductions.
Okay.
So it is a package that there's something for everybody, but the biggest portion went to the richest people. And there were some cuts, and the cuts were particularly aimed at two classes of people. The biggest cuts occurred in medical assistance to the poorer classes. They make it much harder to qualify for medical aid by the poor. And the second place where he cuts are programs that were prioritized by the Biden administration. Number one, the Biden administration seeks to increase the supply of green energy in the US. So giving tax credits to people who buy electric cars, put on solar panels, he's eliminating all of them. And the other thing that he's doing is to attack the purveyors of progressive liberal ideas, specifically the elite universities. So he's cutting research funding to the universities. Now, the popular thing, tax cut is certainly popular, even though you may get a small part of that cuts rather than a large part. Tax cuts is popular, but cutting spending is never popular, because cutting spending means that someone is getting a benefit removed. So inevitably, in all of these exercises, under Reagan, under Bush Jr., and under Donald Trump, the tax cuts greatly exceed the cuts in expenditure. So it means that the deficit goes up in each round. Now, that is and so if you look at the deficit as a share of GDP, it's been going up over time.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens when the government runs a deficit? What happens when you spend more than you earn? Well, you borrow money. So the government has to go borrow the money for the deficit. And the question is, can a government always borrow money? One thing for sure is that when a government wants to borrow money but is unable to borrow it, two things happen. One, it certainly cannot spend more. Basically, it has to cut its expenditure to match its revenue. The bad news is when it is known that the government wanted to borrow, but the markets refuse to lend to the government, the private sector in each of the countries will say, hey, the government needs money, so it's going to come after my money. So the first thing that happens when a government is having trouble to borrow money is that money starts running out of the country. And when money starts running out of the country, that means that the stock market in the country will crash because people are redeeming their stocks to take the money out. And the most dramatic part is their currency will crash because there's this huge money that is trying to leave the country. So that's why governments in general do regard deficits management very gingerly. But the United States is very lucky in that it faces less difficulties in borrowing than most other countries of the world.
Okay, I want to come back to the consequences of this of adding to an already massive national debt, or adding to the deficit, and maybe the consequences for the global economy. But before we get international, can we continue looking domestically what this big beautiful bill might mean for the domestic economy? You talked about the tax cuts, but any part of this bill that you think will actually boost growth or boost investment, or is this more politics than economics?
Well, the question is, when the government cuts revenue, does investment go up? Investments generally react to the new discoveries. In other words, like the investments in AI are continuing to increase regardless of whether there are tax rates or not. So the US boom that we see is less the result of the tax cuts than the fact that there has just been a tremendous acceleration in technological innovation. Who is not talking about AI? We are, of course, talking about very positive aspects in that it will greatly raise productivity, and there are frightening aspects of AI, but that's not getting attention now. So the result is the economy is on a roll, and the tax cuts is coming at a time when the stock market are really excited by the improvements in digitalization, robotics, and uh, AI.
All right. Do you think that this could exacerbate, or what do you think this could mean for inequality in America? You talked a little bit about some of the cuts, and I think the critics to this bill have highlighted the kind of gutting of the healthcare and social safety nets in America. Do you think that this could be this could widen the inequality in amongst American society?
Well, the fact that most of the tax cuts go towards the rich certainly increases the inequality. And high tech usually results in displacement of low skill jobs. In other words, instead of having someone answer the phone to sell you airplane tickets, you have got a chatbot selling you air tickets. So you could see that the displacement of jobs definitely does not favor the lower income. What is disturbing are the cuts to education programs, especially funding programs for the poor to go to college. So cutting the funding of the poor to get more educated, I think, can only hurt the economy. And unless, of course, that the rich people spend so much money on restaurants that there's a shortage of waiters and the waiters' salaries go skyrocketing. But that is unlikely to happen. Your food will be delivered by a robot. That we already see it in the Klang Valley.
Or a drone could deliver it right to your doorstep. Prof. Wu, let's look at the global consequences. And you talked about how this might, create a currency drop because money might run, given the whenever the US runs huge deficits. It could be consequential to the rest of the global economy. What ripple effects do you see for other countries, countries like Malaysia, for instance, when the US runs huge deficits or retreats from, multilateralism while still influencing the global markets?
Well, one thing for sure is the US would get into trouble only if the people that's been traditionally lending money to the US gets more cautious about lending money to the US. There is for the people who are traditionally lending money to the US, their first consideration is how risky are US government bonds compared to Japanese government bonds, compared to German government bonds, because you have to put your money in some place. Well, the US is very lucky in that all the governments in the world are running larger than normal deficits. And so even though US deficits has gone up, so have they in the rest of the world. So you cannot run from US government bonds to German government bond because deficit is going up there too. So that is to the US favor. The second thing that is in the US favor is that the US dollar is effectively the currency that other countries use when they trade among themselves. Like when Malaysia buys something from Argentina, the Malaysian business or consumer will have to pay in dollars. And when the Argentinian wants to buy our durians, they would also have to settle in dollars. So both sides, so the people who want to hold dollars are not just Americans. The Malaysians want to have some dollars. The Argentinians want to have some dollars. And how did they get the dollars in the first place? They got the dollars in the first place two ways. One is they had sold some goods to the US and they hold on to the US dollar. But since the US dollar does not pay interest, you use it to buy an American government bond, because an American government bond can be quickly sold into dollars. So what happened is the rest of the world has been accumulating US government debt because they need to use US dollars in global trade. And as the global economy expands, and so along with it, international trade. Because when we get richer, we buy more Argentinian goods and Argentinians eat more durians. And so the result is our holdings of dollars, our inventory will go up. So that is a natural growth in the demand for dollars because the economy grows. But if the US government were to unload more government bonds than this natural growth rate in demand for US government bonds, then they risk upsetting the market. People get nervous about, would the US be able to pay me back? And this is not an idle comment, because in 2011, way back in 2011, S&P had downgraded US government bonds from AAA. AAA means the highest possible grade, the lowest default probability, to AA plus. And in 2023, Fitch, the second of the three well-known agencies, downgraded it to AA plus. And when Donald Trump announced his big, beautiful bill, Moody's has now downgraded it to AA1, which is down. So in other words, the United States at the beginning of 2010 had AAA rating, but that has dropped. But the thing is, so have the rating for many European government bonds. So they have been saved by that. It's just that during COVID, everybody ran huge deficit. And as long as everyone else is running huge deficit, it is okay for you to run huge government deficit. You mustn't be the lone guy out of the, okay. So, okay. But what happens now, the important thing is, while there is a natural demand for dollars, people seeing there is now also three tendencies for people to move away from dollars. And let me tell you what those three natural tendencies are to move away from the dollar. And the worry is that what Trump has done may accelerate these three tendencies to move faster away from the dollar. The first reason you want to move away from the dollar is that it's a simple diversify your risk. Why should you hold all your savings in US government bonds? Why don't you hold some in euro, some in yen, Malaysian ringgit perhaps, and Singapore dollars certainly. But the good news from America is that only the euro is a credible substitute. all the other countries, like the yen, the Singapore dollar, the Swiss franc, their amounts are too small. They are unable to meet that demand for foreign currency. And because Europe is a multiple country entity, because Greek bonds, for example, are rated a lot lower than German government bonds and lower than Finnish government bonds. So there's no one European bond. There are a multitude out of it. And so that is not seen as a reliable storage of wealth. But now there is one likely competitor on the horizon, and that is the Chinese yen, the Chinese yuan. So, but that cannot be a big substitute for the dollar yet, largely because the yuan is not freely tradable. You cannot just take money into and out of China very quickly. They have capital controls. So the first natural tendency to move away from the dollar is simple diversification of risk. The second reason to move away from the dollar is that you feel that the US is getting to be irresponsible fiscally, and potentially inflation would come. Why would the inflation come? Because once people stop buying as much dollars, the value of the dollar would drop. And if the value of the dollar drop, you don't want to be left holding it. And so that is the natural tendency, given what Trump has done, to think that the dollar is less, the value of the dollar is less guaranteed than before. The third reason why people are moving away from the dollar is that the Americans have been using it as a weapon in their geopolitical competition. Like, for example, it froze the assets of governments that it doesn't like. Because you must understand that these countries have held their US bonds, and these US bonds are usually held on their behalf by an American investment house. And when the US government grabs it, hence taking away the funds of countries that it doesn't like, these countries naturally want to move away. But how about other countries which might say, I don't know which day that Donald Trump is not going to like my face, and so I better hold less US dollars now. So the weaponization of the dollar as a geostrategic instrument is undermining the role of the dollar. But of course, the biggest erosion of the dollar would occur when there comes a credible substitute to the dollar. I had identified the renminbi, but then the renminbi is not tradable. There is one now on the environment, which it could potentially be a substitute for the dollar. But it is not at that stage yet until it has become big enough. I'm talking about cryptocurrencies. Right now, cryptocurrencies can be killed by all the governments of the world if they cooperate and ban it. That will kill it right now. But however, there's no such coordination. In fact, Donald Trump, right before his inauguration, introduced his own cryptocurrency. Now, what is currency? Currency is a medium of exchange that people are willing to accept from each other. In the old days, it was gold bars, silver bars, and seashells in some old societies. So it is something that we are all willing to accept when we do transactions. If crypto gets widely used enough, then it cannot possibly be made illegitimate. And there's no way to stop it. So right now, if crypto continues to grow, it will become a credible substitute to the dollar until the renminbi becomes a freely tradable currency. And that, in a way, may prompt the Chinese to hasten up and accelerate their reform of the financial markets and introduce the renminbi as a freely tradable currency. It is beginning because we can see it, the Chinese government is promoting the use of renminbi, like, for example, in its trade with Malaysia. We are having direct clearing houses that could clear trade between Malaysia and China without using dollars. Mm. So Donald Trump's tax cuts, if it undermines faith in the ability of the government to service its debt, the US would lose one of the big benefits that it now enjoys, which is George Washington is now the favorite pin-up boy in the world.
I don't know whether he would appreciate being called a pin-up boy, but Prafu, thank you so much. That was so interesting, the way you took us from this big, beautiful bill to essentially the prospects of de-dollarization. It was interesting. Thank you for getting real about the US, about China, and everywhere and everything in between. That's it from this episode of Wu Says. We will be back next week. I'm Melisa Idris. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.